We are tracking two big stories tonight. Primary results in 4 states, as well as the escalating situation in the Middle East. First, the primaries. Voters went to the polls in South Carolina, North Dakota, Nevada, and Maine, where embattled Democratic Senate candidate Graham Plattner won the nomination handily. He spoke to voters after winning the nomination.
I've made mistakes in my life, mistakes that I regret, that I live with, and that I continue to learn from. And I'm still far from perfect. No matter the challenge or the expense, I will fight for you. I have been willing to die for my country. There is nothing that I will not do for the state of Maine.
Plattner will face incumbent Senator Susan Collins in the general election. Flipping her seat is central to the Democrats' strategy to take back the Senate. Within the last 2 weeks, as early voting was underway in Maine, damaging reports have emerged about Plattner. First, the Wall Street Journal reported that Plattner's wife had warned his campaign about sexually explicit text messages he sent to other women early in their marriage. Then, the New York Times spoke with several women Plattner dated, some alleging his volatile and unsettling behavior, which he denies. There's also news, though, in the race to be California's next governor. Republican and former Fox News host Steve Hilton has advanced to the general election and will face Democrat Xavier Becerra in November. Meanwhile, the Pentagon's Central Command confirms U.S. forces began self-defense strikes against Iran at the direction of the commander-in-chief after an Army helicopter went down off the coast of Oman. The Associated Press reports it collided with an Iranian drone. Both service members were rescued and are in stable condition, according to CENTCOM. There's a lot going on tonight, folks. But first, we want to bring in Ali Velshi, who is the chief data correspondent here at MS Now and soon to be the host of the 11th hour. We are very excited about that, Ali. First, tell us, okay, let's start with the Senate race in Maine, for one. Give us your thoughts.
Well, first of all, we got 45% of the vote in. The Associated Press called this race with 8% of the vote in, which is very, very unusual. That's, as you know, it's not typical to see that, but we started to see these numbers come in, and they've largely stayed the same percentage-wise. Graham Plattner maintaining about 70% of the vote versus Janet Mills at about 20% of the vote. But what happened is that right around 9 p.m., we got votes from Bangor and Portland. You can see in Penobscot County, Graham Plattner, same thing, 72% to 18%. In Portland, 72% to 21% for Janet Mills. And then Augusta came in where we were expecting Janet Mills to do a little bit better, 70% to 20.5. So at that point, you're able to see the shape of how this state was going to go. I will say it was interesting because Janet Mills sort of ran out of money, stepped out of the race, but didn't remove her name from the ballot, and then made a point of telling people in the last week or so that, remember, I'm still on the ballot. It's a pretty strong performance for somebody who wasn't really running, but there as a secondary figure. Let's look at the Democratic primary for governor. This is interesting. 45% of the race in. No one has won just yet. Maine is one of those states where if you don't get 50%, it'll go to a ranked. It becomes a ranked voting situation. So we're not going to get a result on this night because, as you can see, nobody's getting 50%. Pretty close though. 26.6% for Nirav Shah, who was in the lead earlier and then dropped below. Troy Jackson, Hannah Pingree, Angus King the third, Angus King's son, Senator Angus King's son. So we're looking at that in Maine. All around a big night in Maine and a big night for Graham Plattner very earlier than we would have even expected.
You know, Ali, can we also talk about the California's governor's race? I was very struck by the fact that yesterday, while I was on air for the weeknight, it was reported that Steve Hilton was planning today to hold a press conference about the quote-unquote slow balloting that happens. I'm using air quotes for the folks listening at home, that happens in California. Well, that primary was exactly a week ago, and tonight we now know who will be on the ballot in November. But spoiler alert, it is Steve Hilton.
It is Steve Hilton.
One of the folks. Tell us more about this race.
91% of the vote in. Steve Hilton coming in with 25%. Xavier Becerra, obviously, the night of the primary, we were able to advance him to the race. So it'll be Becerra versus Hilton. Tom Steyer trying to, make up the difference, but it wasn't going to happen. We got big vote drops from a few places, including Sacramento County with 93% of the vote in. Again, Steve Hilton did very well there. Los Angeles County almost completely counted. Tom Steyer did well there, but not enough to overcome the statewide pressure from Hilton. So in the end, and I think you addressed this earlier this evening, it's nonsensical. You and I were together with all of our colleagues on Tuesday where we explained something that every California voter knows. California voting is complicated. They make it easy because everybody gets sent a ballot and you can put it in a ballot box, you can mail it, or you can go in person. They make it easy to vote, but it's a bit of a PhD in learning all the topics and all the candidates, and you have to study it and you have to learn it, and it takes a long time to get counted. That's entirely normal. It's not a bug. It's a feature of the system. So Steve Hilton leaning into this nonsense that Donald Trump is on about there must be something wrong. How come the votes keep changing? I think he got a hint that he was, the votes were going his way, but you otherwise would have seen more out of Steve Hilton. It's a completely nonsensical race. I want to tell you about the primaries in South Carolina today as well. This is an interesting story. The gubernatorial primary, Pamela Yvette, the lieutenant governor endorsed by Trump, will go to the runoff along with Alan Wilson. Here's the interesting thing about South Carolina. Ralph Norman, sitting congressman, didn't make it into the primary. And look who's in fifth place, Nancy Mace with 12.3%. I mean, she pretty much supports. She claims she's the MAGA-iest person in the race. She of course fell out with Donald Trump over the Epstein files, and that has cost her heavily tonight.
You never know how it's going to go until election night. Allie,
Yep.
Thank you so much for your time. Good to
My
see
pleasure.
you, and I'll be watching for you next week.
Thank you, my friend.
With that, folks, let's bring in our leadoff panel. Kevin Fry is an MS Now congressional reporter. Sam Stein is here. He is the managing editor for The Bulwark and MS Now political contributor. And Dave Weigel came onto set, Sam, okay? So he's giving you a run for your money. Dave is the political reporter for Semaphore. Kevin has an excuse because he is in Maine tonight. That is why he is not with us. We're going to start with Kevin. Kevin, a year ago, folks did not know who Graham Plattner was. I am interested in what the reaction has been there to his win, given these controversies around him, and frankly, a very fiery speech tonight that we're going to get into.
Yeah, I mean, look, the supporters here, I mean, given the fact that they came out, decided to spend their evening here at this rally, of course, are pretty on fire about what they heard tonight. They love this populist message. They think that he is kind of an authentic individual that feels relatable. He's not part of the Washington establishment. He's going to take on the system in their view. But as you talk to folks, including folks that have been volunteers on the campaign that I met here this evening, they also are willing to say that, yes, the last week and a half of these stories has caused them a bit of angst about where this campaign is going. Some of them will say and have said that, look, at the end of the day, they know a contest against Susan Collins is going to be complicated, no matter who the candidate is. But these last weeks of stories have, of course, kind of taken a little wind out of the sails. But speaking here tonight, of course, he did rev up the crowd with this message that he has been honing over this time, and his team viewed this as a chance to reset where things are in this conversation. And so you saw him very clearly outline a contrast between him and Susan Collins. They see this as a chance to finally put her out of the Senate, and they view the fact that Roe v. Wade has been overturned in the 6 years since the last time she was reelected as one of the potential ways to pry away voters. In fact, I was talking to one female voter here this evening about what she would say to some of those Mills voters. Janet Mills, of course, the governor here, some have viewed her voting for her as kind of a protest vote, a way to send a message to Plattner and to the party that they're not fully satisfied with his candidacy. What would she say to those individuals? And she basically said, yes, Plattner has some problems when it comes to his past involving women, but he's going to be the one that fights for abortion rights. He's going to be the one that stands up for those, whereas Collins has failed. That is the sort of message that they are hoping that Plattner can now establish heading into the actual general election.